October 12, 1947. A cold Soviet testing range in Izhevsk. A fearful silence. The cold air frozen over the snow. And standing in the middle, a young Russian engineer. In his hands, he held a new weapon. A weapon the world had yet to see. Mikhail Kalashnikov took a deep breath. He pulled the trigger, and in an instant, the silent field was consumed by a storm of bullets. The generals stood stunned. They knew, deep down, this was not just a gun. It was the most dangerous weapon of the coming century. If you want to know how the AK-47 changed the map of the world's wars, then subscribe to Military Voice. The real story is just beginning. October 12, 1947. Izhevsk, Soviet Union. A frozen wind swept over the empty test range, carrying with it the metallic smell of oil and steel. Crunch, crunched under the boots of the men standing in a tense semicircle. Soviet generals, engineers, officers, mechanics. Dozens of eyes stared toward the center of the field, where a single young man stood alone, quiet, thin, with the posture of someone who had already fought a war and survived it. His name was Mikhail Timofeyevich Kalashnikov, tank mechanic, wound survivor, and now an unlikely inventor. In his hands, he held a new weapon, a weapon the world had yet to see. Mikhail Kalashnikov took a deep breath. He pulled the trigger, and in an instant, the silent field was consumed by a storm of bullets. The generals stood stunned. They knew, deep down, this was not just a gun. It was the most dangerous weapon of the coming century. If you want to know how the AK-47 changed the map of the world's wars, then subscribe to Military Voice. The real story is just beginning. October 12, 1947. Izhevsk, Soviet Union. A frozen wind swept over the empty test range, carrying with it the metallic smell of oil and steel. Crunch, crunched under the boots of the men standing in a tense semicircle. Soviet generals, engineers, officers, mechanics. Dozens of eyes stared toward the center of the field, where a single young man stood alone, quiet, thin, with the posture of someone who had already fought a war and survived it. His name was Mikhail Timofeyevich Kalashnikov, tank mechanic, wound survivor, and now an unlikely inventor. In his hands, he held a new weapon, a weapon the world had yet to see. The sun was barely rising, a faint orange bleeding over the frost, when Kalashnikov exhaled a shaky breath and wiped condensation off the black metal. The barrel glistened. The curved magazine reflected the early light like a blade. Behind him, the generals whispered among themselves, some skeptical, some intrigued, most doubtful. Another experiment, one muttered. We've tested dozens. Why would this one be different? Kalashnikov heard them. He ignored them. Because he knew something they didn't. This wasn't another rifle. This was a solution. He remembered the battlefield like it was yesterday, the chaos of 1941, the roar of German tanks, the crushing heat inside his T-34 turret. He remembered the burning metal slicing into his body. And he remembered lying in a hospital bed, hearing Red Army soldiers complaining endlessly about their unreliable rifles, weapons that froze, jammed, or fell apart when they were needed the most. That helplessness had burned a question into his mind. Why do our soldiers suffer with weapons that betray them? His answer was now in his hands. A range officer stepped forward. Comrade Kalashnikov, you may begin the demonstration. The young inventor nodded. He inserted the magazine with a metallic click that echoed across the ice. The cold stung his fingers, but he steadied them. 10 years of war had forged his nerves into steel. He racked the charging handle. The sound sliced the silence like a knife. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Kalashnikov squeezed the trigger. A burst erupted, a ripping, snarling roar, sending fire and casings into the frozen air. The rifle bucked against his shoulder, but the recoil was smooth, controlled, predictable. Snow exploded from the impact zone. Targets shattered like glass. The burst ended. Smoke curled in the icy wind. No jam, no hesitation, no failure. Kalashnikov switched to full auto. This time, the rifle unleashed a storm, a continuous, violent river of fire. Brass casings danced across the snow like golden sparks. Even after 30 rounds, the weapon remained steady. The barrel steamed, but didn't overheat. The mechanism didn't stutter. The generals stared, their skepticism melting into something else. Recognition. Fear. A realization that what they were witnessing was not just another prototype, but a revolution. Kalashnikov lowered the rifle, his breath fogging in front of him. "It's designed for real soldiers," he said. "It won't jam in mud. It won't freeze in winter. It won't fail in desert heat. It works when everything else stops working." A general stepped closer. "What about maintenance and disassembly?" Kalashnikov smiled slightly. He pressed a latch, pulled a pin, and in seconds, the entire rifle came apart in his hands. Springs, cover, bolt, everything exposed, simple, rugged, unbreakable. "In war," Kalashnikov said, "simplicity is life." The officers exchanged looks. They knew they were witnessing a moment that would ripple far beyond Soviet borders, maybe far beyond their lifetimes. One of them approached the inventor with raised eyebrows. "Comrade Kalashnikov, do you realize what you have made?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because the world would answer for him. Months later, the rifle was approved for mass production. It rolled out of factories with the new designation of Tomak Kalashnikova 1947, the AK-47. Soldiers across the Soviet Union received it with cautious curiosity. They tested it in snow, mud, water, dust, sandstorms, monsoons, and it survived everything. It fired when submerged, when choked with dirt, when dropped from trucks or dragged across rocks. Word spread through the Red Army like wildfire. "This thing doesn't die," soldiers whispered. "You can throw it into hell and it will keep firing." It's not just a rifle, it's a companion. Soviet officers realized something terrifying and powerful. They had created a weapon any soldier could master, and every army would fear. And they were right. Within a decade, the AK-47 crossed borders, not officially, but through war, trade, revolution, black markets, and conflict zones. It appeared in jungles, deserts, mountains, city ruins, in the hands of soldiers, rebels, guerrilla fighters, freedom movements, insurgents, on propaganda posters, flags, murals, on TV broadcasts, news reports, and frontline photographs. The world had never seen a rifle like this. Not because it was powerful, many rifles were. Not because it was accurate, some were better. Not because it was cheap, though it was, but because it worked. Always. Everywhere. In the hands of anyone. A weapon born in a frozen Soviet test range had become the most iconic firearm in human history. More than 100 million would be produced. More than 100 nations would adopt it. More wars would be fought with the AK-47 than any weapon before it. And yet, for all its impact, Mikhail Kalashnikov remained humble. When once asked how he invented a weapon that changed the world, he gave an answer that captured his life perfectly. "I made it for defense, for protecting my country, that it spread beyond that was never my intention. The world didn't listen. History rarely listens. But on that cold morning in 1947, as the smoke cleared and the echoes faded, the future had already been written, not by nations or generals or governments, but by a wounded tank mechanic, standing alone in the snow, holding a rifle that would reshape the next century.